This is MetaTherapy, where we talk about therapy itself, not advice, not diagnosis, just understanding the process so you can use it better. Each episode of MetaTherapy is psychoeducation, not therapy. If something resonates, it's meant to be language you can bring back into your own work. I want to start today with something that's been sitting with me for a long time. The version of this topic I could deliver that's clean and clinical, and I could lay out the framework, cite the research, walk you through the steps, and I will do some of that because the framework matters. But I also want to be honest with you. I've sat with this one personally, and I don't think I would be doing justice to this concept if I pretended otherwise. So let's talk about radical acceptance. Specifically, let's talk about what it actually asks of us, because I think it's one of the most misused, most misunderstood terms in therapeutic language today. You hear it everywhere. Just accept it. Practice acceptance. It shows up on Instagram graphics next to a sunset. It shows up in a session when a client is stuck in a painful loop and we reach for it like a tool we hope will do the job. But here's what I notice, and here's what the research actually backs up. Most of the time, when people say they're practicing acceptance, what they're actually doing is one of two very different things. Some are performing acceptance, moving their lips, telling themselves the story, while the pain is still fully in charge underneath. Others, and this one is sneakier, are using acceptance as a sophisticated form of avoidance. If I tell myself I've accepted it, I don't have to feel the full weight of it. Neither of those is what Marsha Linehan meant, and neither of those is what we're talking about today. And if you're watching this and one of those two things sounds a little familiar, good, you're in the right place. Today is about radical acceptance as a practice of full contact reality, what it means to stop fighting what is, and why that, paradoxically, is one of the most powerful, most compassionate things a person can do. We're going to look at where the concept comes from, what it actually requires neurologically and emotionally, where it tends to break down, especially in our closest relationships, and what it means to come to it late. Because sometimes we don't get there in the moment. Sometimes we look back and realize we had a choice, acceptance or resistance, and we choose resistance. And we have to accept that too. Radical acceptance comes out of dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT, which Marsha Linehan developed in the late 1980s, originally for people with borderline personality disorder. It has since become one of the most evidence-supported therapeutic frameworks we have, used across diagnostic presentations, across ages, and across, importantly, cultures. DBT is one of the most extensively researched psychological treatments available today. Meta-analyses consistently show efficacy for emotional dysregulation, self-harm reduction, and treatment retention. Linehan herself has described radical acceptance as rooted in a synthesis of cognitive behavioral science and Zen practice. The radical part is important. It doesn't mean partial or conditional or I accept this once I understand it. It means total, complete, reality as it is, not as it should have been. Her formulation, pain is inevitable. Suffering is optional. Suffering in her framework is what happens when pain meets non-acceptance. When we take reality and add the layer of this should not be. That addition, this should not be, is where we lose years. Think about how cognitive energy goes into relitigating what already happened, reconstructing the moment of the decision. What if I had said that instead? What if I had done that differently? That's not processing. That's a loop. And the loop is the suffering. It's worth clarifying that what radical acceptance is not, because this is where the concept gets distorted, especially in pop psychology. Radical acceptance is not approval. Accepting that something happened is not the same thing as saying it was okay. It is not resignation. It doesn't mean you stop working toward change. It means you stop working against reality. It is not a one-time event. It is a practice. Linehan herself described it as something you may have to choose thousands of times, not once and done. And it is not the same as forgiveness. The two are off, the two often travel together, but they are different practices. Acceptance is about your relationship to reality. Forgiveness is about your relationship to a person from within. ACT research distinguishes experiential acceptance from cognitive reappraisal. Acceptance involves willingness to have an experience as is without needing to change its form. This is distinct from suppression, rationalization, or premature meaning making. Here's what's happening underneath, and this is worth understanding because it reframes the whole struggle. The brain does not like reality when reality is painful. Specifically, the prefrontal cortex, our executive function, our meaning making center, is constantly in dialogue with the amygdala, which processes threat. When something happens that violates our expectations, our predictions, our sense of how the world works, there is a neurological alarm response. And part of what that alarm response does is try to solve the problem. Problem solving is adaptive. It kept our ancestors alive. But when the problem is something that cannot be solved, a relationship that is ruptured, a decision that cannot be undone, a reality we cannot change, the problem solving machinery keeps running anyway. Research on repetitive negative thinking, or RNT, shows that rumination activates the default mode network, or the DMN, the same network active in self-referential processing and autobiographical memory. Chronic RNT is associated with elevated cortisol, disruptive sleep architecture, and increased risk for depression. So what happens? The brain loops. It rehearses. It re-examines. And each pass through the loop registers in the body as a new threat response, even though the event itself is in the past. From a polyvagal lens, unresolved non acceptance keeps the nervous system in a state of incomplete discharge. The event happened, but the body hasn't been given permission to register it as over. This is why acceptance isn't just a cognitive shift. You can't think your way into it. And this is where a lot of well-intentioned therapeutic work falls short. We're working at the level of belief when the unfinished business is happening at the level of nervous system regulation. I've seen this in my own clinical work. Clients who can articulate exactly why something makes sense, exactly what they should feel, and then look at me and say, but I still feel it. And that's not a failure of understanding. That's the body doing its job. The work is meeting it there. What radical acceptance does when it's working is it gives the nervous system a signal that the threat has been acknowledged, not minimized, not bypassed, acknowledged. And that acknowledgement is what creates the conditions for discharge, for movement, for something to actually shift. I want to spend a little more time here because I think the place where radical acceptance is most tested and most needed is in our closest relationships, and specifically in the one relationship that carries the most projective weight of any relationship in human psychology, the relationship between a parent and a child. Parents by nature have a stake in outcome. That's not pathology, that's biology. We are wired to protect, to guide, to course correct. The parental attachment system evolved to keep a child alive and oriented toward well-being. But that same protective impulse, when it runs past the age of appropriate autonomy, becomes something different. It becomes controlled, dressed as love. A friend came to me several years into a strained relationship with their adult child, a child they had raised closely, known deeply, and watched make choices they found deeply worrying. The relationship had frayed. There had been conflict, distance, and eventually silence. I knew things no one else saw, the friend told me. I had information. I was trying to protect them. And they were right. They did have information. Their concerns were not invented. But what had happened slowly, imperceptibly, was that I see something you don't see had become, I need you to see it too. And I need you to see it too had become the condition of the relationship. The child stopped calling. The friend had spent years in the loop replaying the pivotal moments, finding the places where a different word might have changed everything. That loop was not grief, it was non acceptance, and it was costing them both. Here's what I've come to believe clinically and personally. The hardest version of radical acceptance isn't accepting what someone did to you, it's accepting what you did or failed to do in a relationship you cared about. Because there, you don't just have the pain of loss, you have the story of agency, the idea that there was a moment, a choice, a different word, and you didn't get there on time. From an IFS perspective, this is often where a protector part gets activated, a part that has decided that it can identify the exact moment things went wrong and it can retroactively fix it. The part is not trying to cause suffering, it is trying to solve a problem it was never equipped to solve, the irreversibility of the past. I want to name this because I think it serves what we're talking about, not as I have sat in a version of this chair, not as a clinician, but as a person. I've had to practice what I'm describing here, and I can tell you from the inside that the moment of turning toward acceptance rather than resistance doesn't feel like relief at first. It feels like letting go of a rope you've been pulling on for years, and you don't know what happens when you let go. But the rope was burning your hands. The IFS frame is useful here because it doesn't ask us to silence the protector. It asks us to get curious about it. What are you afraid will happen if we stop fighting this? What does the acceptance feel like as a threat? Often the answer is, if I accept it, it means I'm okay with it. Or if I accept it, I stop mattering to the story. And radical acceptance has to meet that fear directly. You can accept something fully and still know it was wrong. You can grieve a relationship and still love the person. You can stop fighting reality without erasing your own experience of it. I want to address something directly because I think it's one of the more painful dimensions of this topic, and it doesn't get enough airtime. What do you do with radical acceptance when the moment has already passed? When the relationship has already ruptured? When the door is already closed, or at least not open right now? When you can look back and clearly see the place where acceptance would have served you and everyone involved, and you didn't have it then. The first thing I want to say is the window for acceptance is always now. This is exactly a core principle in DBT that often gets overlooked. Acceptance is not about the past event. It's about your present relationship to it, which means it's never too late to stop fighting a reality, even one that is years old. What changes when you come to it late is the texture of the work. You're not just accepting the original loss, you're accepting the lost time. You're accepting the version of yourself that wasn't ready. You're accepting that it might never know what would have happened if you had gotten there sooner. Research on self-compassion shows that extending compassion towards one's own failures rather than self-criticism is associated with greater emotional resilience and improved capacity for repair in relationships. Paradoxically, self-compassion predicts more, not less, accountability because it reduces the defensive self-protection that makes acknowledgement threatening. That last layer, accepting yourself as the person who wasn't ready, is often where people get stuck because we live in a culture that narrativizes self-awareness as if it should always arrive on time, as if we are responsible not just for what we did, but for not knowing better sooner. But knowledge isn't linear. Insight doesn't follow a schedule. You can only apply the framework you had at the time that you had it. And part of radical acceptance, full radical acceptance, is accepting that you were doing the best you could with what you understood then. This isn't absolution. It isn't rewriting history. It isn't simply telling the truth about what was available to you at the time. And here's the thing about acceptance that arrives late. It still changes everything. It doesn't restore what was lost. It doesn't guarantee any particular outcome, but it changes your nervous system's relationship to the story. It changes the loop, and it changes subtly, but really, the energy you bring to whatever comes next. Because relationships are not only past tense. Even in estrangement, there is a present tense relationship to the person you love, to the possibility of contact, to the version of yourself that might one day be in the room with them again. And the person you are in that potential future room is being shaped right now by whether or not you're still at war with reality. I want to close with something concrete because I think the topic needs landing gear. Linehan describes radical acceptance as having several discrete steps, and I want to walk through them briefly, not as a formula, but as an orientation. The first is observing your resistance. Before you can accept, you have to notice you're fighting. What does the non acceptance feel like in your body? Where is it living? This is the somatic entry point. Not just, I am resisting this, but I can feel the contraction of resistance. The second is reminding yourself that reality is what it is. That sounds obvious, but it really requires deliberate cognitive redirection, specifically away from the should and back to the is. Not this shouldn't have happened, but this happened. This is what is true. The third is recognizing that resisting reality does not change it. It only prolongs the pain. This is the leverage point. The resistance isn't protecting you. It's extending the wound. The fourth, and this is the one that tends to crack something open, is acknowledging the causes. Everything that happened had causes. You had causes. They had causes. The situation had causes. That doesn't mean it was inevitable or right. It means it was real, and real things come from somewhere. And the fifth is practicing in the body, not just the mind. Relaxing your face, dropping your shoulders, breathing, giving the nervous system a physical signal that the war is over. If you're doing this work in the context of a relationship, especially an estranged one, I want to offer this. Acceptance is not the end of love. It may actually be the purest expression of it. To love someone enough to stop making them wrong, to stop needing them to have been different so that you could be okay. That's not giving up. That's showing up. Here's what I keep coming back to when I think about this concept. Radical acceptance is not what you do when you've run out of options. It's not defeat dressed up in therapeutic language. It's not giving up on someone you'd love. It's what you do when you're finally ready to stop making your peace contingent on a reality that isn't going to change. And I think that distinction matters, especially for people watching this who are sitting with a relationship that's gone quiet, a door that hasn't opened in a while, a person they still love deeply and can't reach. The work isn't to stop caring. The work is to care without requiring a particular response to it, to let love be love without the attached demand that it be returned in the form you needed when you needed it. That is extraordinarily difficult. I don't want to pretend that it isn't. But it is also, and I say this having watched people arrive at it in the sessions that I've been in and having had to practice it in my own personal life, one of the most freeing things a human being can do. You don't get to go back. None of us do. But you get to decide how you carry it forward. And that, even after everything, is not a small thing. If this episode resonated with you, especially if you're working through something like what we've described today, there's a guided meditation on the channel that pairs with this. Meditation Monday, you are here. It's built around the same somatic principles we covered today, meeting reality in the body, not just the mind. If you're a clinician watching this and want to go deeper on the IFS framing of non-acceptance, the Sunday series is building toward a full framework synthesis, so stay close to that arc. And if this is something you're navigating personally and you want to talk to someone, there are resources in the description below. You don't have to do this alone. I'm Dominic Gadori, and this has been MetaTherapy. I'll see you next week.